Calvin Brooks arrived at Whispering Pines just after sunset. The neighborhood was flawless. White fences, manicured lawns, not a single trash bin out of place. It was the kind of suburb that looked like it had been pulled from a brochure titled Peaceful Living. But Calvin knew better. He'd seen the darkest things thrive under the surface, of places that smiled too much. Still, he wasn't here on assignment. This time, it was personal. Or, so he thought. He parked his U-Haul in the driveway of his newly purchased 2-story home on Maple Haven Lane. Everything about the place screamed order. HOA enforced perfection. As he hauled boxes inside, the motion detection porch light clicked on behind him. Calvin turned instinctively, expecting a neighbor, but saw only a car across the street. A black SUV with tinted windows. Engine running, lights on. Odd. He stood still for a moment, box in hand, watching. The SUV didn't move. No one stepped out. He narrowed his eyes, trying to see inside, but the windows were too dark. After nearly a full minute of silent staring, the SUV slowly pulled away and disappeared around the bend. Calvin wasn't easily rattled, but that wasn't a welcome committee. It felt like surveillance. Shaking it off, he brought the rest of the boxes inside and locked up for the night. Whispering Pines was quiet, unnaturally quiet. No kids playing, no dogs barking, no late-night joggers. Just the low hum of central air units and the occasional flicker of porch lights switching on and off. At 6:47 a.m., the next morning, Calvin opened his front door to grab the paper and froze. A thick envelope was taped directly to the center of his door. Plain manila. No postage. No sender name. Just the words, Notice of HOA Infraction, stamped in red block letters. He tore it open. Violation 01 category. Exterior disharmony details. Decorative mailbox is non-standard in finish and color. Please replace with an approved black, matte model within 72 hours to avoid fines. Whispering Pines HOA Compliance Oversight. Team Calvin stared at the letter, then at his mailbox. It was a standard USPS box, navy blue, sturdy, nothing flashy, nothing out of place. He stepped back and scanned the street. Nobody was out. No footsteps. No HOA rep. Not even a paper boy. But as he turned to go back inside, he caught a glimmer of movement, a flicker of light in the upstairs window of the house across from his, the same house the SUV had been parked. In front of last night, someone was watching him. By noon, another envelope had appeared. This one slid under the garage door while he was unloading furniture. Violation 02. Overgrown shrubbery. Overgrown, the landscaping had been handled by professionals before the sale. Calvin crouched down near the hedges to see what they could possibly mean, and that's when he noticed it. A small pink flag stuck into the dirt. Not there yesterday, no gardener would have left that. He yanked it up and found a tiny sticker attached, flagged for evaluation. His heart rate ticked up. He checked his camera doorbell's footage, but there was nothing. No person on record. Just static for 90 seconds, during the time the second notice appeared. And that's when it hit him. He wasn't just dealing with a nosy HOA. Something else was happening in Whispering Pines. Something that watched in silence and erased its own trail. By the end of the first week, Calvin had received 6 citations. Each envelope arrived silently, some taped to his back gate, others wedged under his windshield wipers. Even one slipped into a locked toolbox in his garage. None of them came with timestamps, signatures, or names. Just that same sterile red stamp. HOA Infraction Notice. Violation 003. Unapproved front door paint color. His door was beige, The same beige as every house on the block. Violations are where for. Reflective surface hazard. Apparently his second-story window reflected sunlight into the street at 8:10 a.m. Violation 05. Non-regulation lawn ornament. A welcome mat with a pine. Tree design. Supposedly a violation of aesthetic uniformity. Calvin kept them all in a file folder labeled HOA BS. But the humor faded fast. He tried calling the HOA's official number listed on the welcome packet. Voicemail. Every time. A robotic voice asked him to leave a message. When he visited the HOA's local office on Main Street, the door was locked with a handwritten sign. Hours by appointment only. Please submit all concerns via email. The email bounced back. Mailbox full. At night he saw the same thing. Movement on the edges of his property. Once, a figure stood across the street holding what looked like a clipboard, just outside the glow of the streetlight. When Calvin stepped out onto the porch, the person drifted away into the dark, silent as fog. His neighbors were no help either. When he greeted the woman walking her dog across the street, she froze like a statue. "Beautiful morning," Calvin offered. She stared at him with wide eyes, then whispered, "They're watching," before tugging her dog and retreating behind her door. Another neighbor, a man watering his lawn, refused to even look up. The hose ran over his foot, soaking his sneaker, but he didn't move, just stared straight ahead, as if acknowledging Calvin would invite some unspoken consequence. The next night, Calvin placed a chair near the front window, lights off, camera ready. For hours, nothing moved. Just the flickering of porch lights and the mechanical hiss of sprinklers. But at 3:12 a.m., the motion sensor pinged. He grabbed his binoculars and scanned the shadows there, by the side of his house. A figure in dark clothes crouched near the bushes. The person reached into a pocket, pulled something out, and stuck it into the hedge. Then, a quick flash. Camera. Flash again. Flash! Then they backed away and disappeared around the corner. Calvin sprinted outside, heart pounding, but by the time he reached the spot, the person was gone. In the hedge, he found a laminated tag. Violation 07. Invasive. Plant growth, stapled to a branch that hadn't even been there yesterday. That was the moment Calvin knew this wasn't incompetence. This wasn't about maintaining appearances. This was deliberate, strategic, coordinated. He wasn't being cited. He was being targeted. Someone inside the HOA, or posing as them, was orchestrating a pressure campaign. But for what? To force him out, to intimidate him. He didn't know the answer yet, but one thing was becoming clear. This was no ordinary neighborhood, and Whispering Pines had no intention of letting Calvin Brooks settle in peacefully. Calvin's patience had run thin. He wasn't about to be a victim of some shadowy HOA vendetta, or whatever this was. Determined to catch the perpetrators red-handed, he beefed up his surveillance. He installed multiple hidden cameras, small, wireless, disguised as birdhouses, porch lights, even flower pots. He synced them all to his phone, setting alerts for the smallest movement. That night, Calvin sat in the darkened living room, phone in hand, eyes darting between camera feeds. Hours passed with only the usual: crickets chirping, a distant owl hooting, the hum of an air conditioner. At 2:17 a.m., his phone buzzed violently. Motion detected. Backyard. Calvin flicked on the patio light, grabbed a flashlight, and crept outside. The cool night air smelled faintly of pine and freshly cut grass. He scanned the yard carefully. Near the far corner, just past the hydrangeas, a shadow moved. Calvin raised his flashlight, but the figure vanished into the bushes before the beam landed on them. He hurried back inside. checking the cameras. The footage was strange. For the first 5 seconds, a person was clearly visible. Dark clothes, hood up, crouched, low to the ground. The camera caught them reaching into a jacket pocket, pulling out a small device. Then, the image abruptly went fuzzy, like static interference, cutting out for nearly 2 minutes. When the footage returned, the figure was back, but this time with their face turned away from the camera, obscured by the hood's shadow. Even stranger, as the figure moved away, the camera's clock timestamp was 10 minutes ahead of real time. Calvin frowned. He watched the footage again, slowing it down frame by frame. The person wasn't just being cautious. They were deliberately avoiding identification, and someone had tampered with the footage's timing. That wasn't amateur work. He felt a chill creeping up his spine. The next day, Calvin approached the HOA office. During the afternoon hours he found online. The lights were off, the door locked. No signs of life. He rang the bell repeatedly. No answer. Then out of the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker. A glimpse of movement inside. A silhouette darted behind a filing cabinet. He knocked again, louder this time. The door suddenly creaked. "Open an inch. Can I help you?" A voice whispered, breathless and strained. Calvin peered in. The office was cramped. Walls lined with filing cabinets, stuffed with papers. But there was no receptionist. No official presence. "Who's here? Where are the inspectors?" Calvin asked. The voice hesitated. "Inspectors? We don't have inspectors. Right now, you should call ahead for appointments." Calvin felt the weight of the lie settle. No real inspectors. No transparency. Just shadows and silence. Back at home, Calvin reviewed the footage again. He zoomed in on the figure's jacket pocket. Something metallic glinted under the flashlight beam. An unmarked camera. Maybe a phone, but no badge or official equipment. He realized the inspectors were fakes. Actors sent to intimidate, to watch, to fabricate violations. The question haunted him. Who had the motive? And what was their ultimate goal? His gut told him this was no petty HOA feud. This was something darker, something calculated. Calvin decided he needed allies, but the neighborhood's silence was deafening. No one wanted to talk. No one wanted to be watched, and the more Calvin probed, the more it felt like the watchers were watching him. The silence from his neighbors was louder than any noise. Calvin had knocked on nearly every door on Maple Haven Lane. Some windows cracked open. Eyes peered out nervously, then slammed shut. Others ignored him entirely, avoiding eye contact, as if his very presence was a threat. Late one afternoon, while standing near the community mailbox, Calvin noticed a man sitting on a bench. An elderly man with silver hair and a cane. His face was weathered, but his eyes sharp, alert. Calvin approached cautiously. "Hello, I'm Calvin Brooks, your new neighbor." The man studied him a long moment. Then he whispered, "You weren't supposed to move into that house." Calvin blinked. "What do you mean?" The man glanced around, then slipped a folded note into Calvin's hand. "Read this carefully. Don't show it to anyone." Calvin unfolded the paper. Scrawled hastily were 2 words. "They watch." Before he could ask more, the man stood, leaning heavily on his cane, and shuffled away. That night, Calvin sat at his kitchen table, the note in front of him, his mind racing. Who were they? The HOA or something else? He decided to ask the neighbors again, but in a different way. Instead of knocking on doors, he watched from a distance. He noticed patterns. Vehicles parked only at certain times. Flickering porch lights signaling brief meetings. Glances exchanged. Through curtains, Whispering Pines wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a network. A network of silent watchers, silent enforcers, silent threats. Calvin's phone buzzed suddenly. A text from an unknown number. Don't trust anyone here. Especially the HOA. They're not what they seem. Chills ran down his spine. He tried to reply, but the number was blocked. The next day, he visited the local hardware store. While browsing, a man with a thick beard and piercing eyes approached. "You're the new guy with the violations, right?" Calvin nodded cautiously. "I'm Marcus," the man said. "I used to live here. Then I tried to fight the HOA's fake citations. They don't just fine you, they ruin you." Calvin leaned in. "What do you mean?" Marcus lowered his voice. "They target you, spread rumors. Sometimes they even break things inside your home. But when you report it, nothing happens. Because they're backed by people who don't want this place to change." Calvin's heart pounded. "This is bigger than landscaping rules." Marcus continued. "It's control, fear. And if you want to stay, you have to play their game." Calvin realized Marcus was right. This wasn't a typical HOA. Whispering Pines was under a shadow, held hostage by unseen forces. That night, Calvin reviewed the security footage again, comparing it with his neighbor's behavior. He noticed a pattern. Those inspectors appeared shortly after dark, when most residents were inside and silent. But what unsettled him most was what Marcus had said, breaking things inside homes. Had his own house already been violated? Was he living inside a trap? Calvin's mind raced. His only weapon was knowledge, and his next move would be risky, because the watchers didn't just observe, they protected their secrets fiercely, and Calvin had just entered the lion's den. Determined to uncover the truth behind the faceless HOA, Calvin marked his calendar for the next scheduled HOA meeting. The official notice had been posted on the community bulletin board for weeks, an event where residents could voice concerns, learn about upcoming projects, and, hopefully, confront the mysterious inspectors who had been haunting him. The afternoon of the meeting arrived. Calvin dressed in his sharpest shirt, feeling a mix of anticipation and dread. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he was ready to demand answers. He arrived at the community center, a small brick building at the end of Cedar Lane. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the parking lot. The building's front door was locked tight, its windows darkened by heavy curtains. Calvin glanced at his watch. The meeting was supposed to start 15 minutes ago. He rang the doorbell repeatedly. No response. A sinking feeling spread through him. This wasn't right. He circled the building, checking for another entrance. Nothing. Peering through the grimy windows, he spotted movement, shadows flickering behind the curtains, shifting silhouettes. Calvin knocked loudly against the glass. Suddenly, a text pinged on his phone. It was from an unknown number. "You're not a regular homeowner. We know what you really are." His breath caught. Who could have sent that? How did they know? He looked around. Empty streets, closed houses. No one in sight. Calvin's hand tightened around his phone. He felt eyes on him, watching, waiting. A sudden creak behind him made him spin around. Standing just beyond the tree line was a figure, indistinct in the dusk, their face hidden beneath a low hood. Calvin took a step forward, voice steady but low. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, they turned and vanished into the gathering shadows, melting away like smoke. Calvin's heart thundered in his chest. He walked back to the door, trying the handle. Locked. But then, as if sensing his persistence, the door swung open a crack. "Can I help you?" A strained voice whispered from the darkness. Calvin peered inside. The room was barely lit, faint outlines of folding chairs, and a table cluttered with papers. No sign of a crowd, no signs of a meeting. Where is everyone? Calvin asked. There was a pause. We don't have meetings right now, the voice said, trembling slightly. Things have changed. Calvin frowned. Who's running the HOA? A long silence. Then the voice muttered. There is no HOA. Not really. Just management. Management? Calvin echoed, his mind racing. People who decide who belongs. Here, the voice said. Who doesn't? Calvin's grip on the door tightened. This isn't about rules or lawns. It's about control. A sudden noise startled him. A door slamming somewhere inside the building. The voice vanished. Calvin was left alone in the darkness. He stepped back outside and glanced at the streetlights flickering on. The neighborhood that had promised peace now felt like a cage, and Calvin knew this was only the beginning. Calvin's mind raced as he walked away from the empty community center. Every step echoed with the heavy truth he'd just uncovered. This wasn't a typical HOA dispute. This was something far darker, a shadow network controlling the neighborhood like a fortress, enforcing silence and compliance with ruthless precision. But Calvin wasn't helpless. He hadn't shared this yet. Before moving to Whispering Pines, Calvin had worked in cyber forensics, a digital detective who specialized in uncovering hidden surveillance, breaking into encrypted systems, and exposing corporate and government cover-ups. Now, his skills were about to become his greatest weapon. Back in his house, he set up his laptop and started analyzing the footage he'd captured. The distorted clips of inspectors, the tampered timestamps, the subtle anomalies in camera feeds. Hours passed. As Calvin dug deeper into the data, he uncovered faint digital fingerprints, encrypted signals hidden in the video files, overlays that suggested real-time editing, and a network of unregistered Wi-Fi devices broadcasting from nearby houses. Someone was intercepting his cameras. They were manipulating his view of reality. He cross-referenced the MAC addresses with public records, and a pattern emerged. Several devices were linked to homes on Maple Haven Lane, but registered under false names. Calvin's heart pounded. The watchers were embedded neighbors, not outsiders. He realized that if he wanted to fight back, he needed allies, and fast. He reached out discreetly to Marcus, the man from the hardware store. Marcus answered cautiously, but agreed to meet at a nearby coffee shop. When they met, Marcus handed Calvin a folder filled with documents, photos, and scribbled notes, evidence of past homeowners who had tried to resist the HOA's intimidation tactics, letters destroyed, property damaged, even threats to their personal safety. None of these people are here anymore, Marcus said grimly. They moved, sold out, or disappeared. Calvin's jaw tightened. He wasn't going to be the next. So casualty. Together, they devised a plan to use Calvin's forensic skills to expose the fake inspectors and the network controlling Whispering Pines. But it wouldn't be easy. The HOA, or whoever was behind it, had eyes everywhere. Still, Calvin had one advantage. They didn't know his real job. That was about to change. He installed hidden microphones and signal jammers around his property, masking his digital footprint. At night, he began running a covert surveillance operation, intercepting the encrypted communications between the fake inspectors and their handlers. Then, he found it. A live feed showing someone outside his house tonight, reviewing a list of violations. Calvin smiled grimly. The hunters were about to Become the hunted. But as he prepared to make his move, a message flashed across his screen. We know who you are now. Calvin's heart pounded as the chilling message blinked on his screen. We know who you are now. His cyber forensic skills had kept him invisible for weeks. But now the hunters had discovered his true identity. The shadowy watchers had stepped up their game. It was time for Calvin to act, fast and decisively. He began to fortify his home, turning it into a digital fortress. Cameras with infrared sensors, hidden microphones, motion detectors, linked to an automated alarm system. He set up encrypted channels to communicate with Marcus, and a few whispered contacts he'd managed to reach outside the neighborhood. Calvin knew the fake inspectors wouldn't stop until they either forced him out or broke his will, so he decided to lure them into a trap. He planted a false violation. A fake notice left prominently on his front door, announcing that he planned to host a community barbecue in 3 days. A bold move in a neighborhood where any unauthorized gathering was strictly forbidden. The note was a bait, designed to flush out anyone who wanted to keep the neighborhood silent. He spent the next days preparing, watching through his cameras as figures moved furtively, scanning the streets, whispering behind closed doors. On the night before the barbecue, Calvin sat in his living room, surrounded by screens streaming live feeds from every angle of his property. At precisely 10:37 p.m., his motion sensor pinged. A figure appeared near the garden gate. A tall, slender person dressed in black, hood up, face concealed. Calvin zoomed in on the live feed. The figure slipped something under the gate. A small square device with blinking lights. He recognized it immediately. A bugging device. Calvin grabbed his radio and whispered to Marcus. They're here, planting bugs. Marcus's voice crackled back. Hold tight, backup is on the way. Calvin switched on the house's internal speaker system. His voice echoed through the yard, distorted but loud. You're wasting your time, the figure froze. Suddenly, lights from neighboring houses flickered on, illuminating the yard. From the shadows emerged several neighbors, faces Calvin hadn't seen before. Wearing dark jackets emblazoned with the HOA logo, they moved with practiced precision, attempting to recover the device. But Calvin was ready. His cameras had already recorded everything. As the intruders scrambled, sirens blared from hidden speakers around the perimeter, startling the group into retreat. Before disappearing into the night, one of the figures shouted, "This isn't over, Brooks!" Calvin's chest heaved, adrenaline surging. He'd made his stand, but he knew the fight was far from finished. He was now a marked man, not just in Whispering Pines, but possibly beyond. The HOA's power ran deep, and Calvin's secret weapon, his identity, was now out in the open. The sun rose over Whispering Pines, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns and silent streets. But beneath the serene morning, a storm brewed. One Calvin was ready to face head-on. He sat at his kitchen table, eyes scanning the files and footage he'd compiled over weeks of covert investigation. The evidence was undeniable now. Fake inspectors, tampered footage, hidden cameras, and a powerful network enforcing control through fear. Calvin's plan was simple: expose the HOA's corruption at the next community meeting, this time real and open to all residents. He had Marcus helping him reach out discreetly to neighbors who'd grown tired of the silence. When the evening arrived, the community center was packed, more than Calvin had dared hope. Faces once wary now filled the seats, whispering with nervous excitement. The HOA president, a poised woman named Lorraine, with sharp eyes and a polished smile, took the stage. Her presence commanded the room, but Calvin noticed the faint tremor in her hands. Calvin stepped forward, laptop in hand, and began projecting the damning footage onto the wall. Videos of fake inspectors sneaking around, timestamp tampering, its secret devices planted on homes. Gasps filled the room. Lorraine's smile faded as Calvin detailed the deception, the intimidation campaign designed to control, silence, and drive out residents who didn't comply. Some neighbors shook their heads in disbelief. Others nodded, relief flooding their faces. Then, just as Calvin was about to reveal the identities behind the operation, the room plunged into darkness. A power outage. Murmurs turned to panic. When the emergency lights flickered on moments later, Lorraine was gone. In her place was a note pinned to the podium. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Leave now or suffer the consequences." Calvin's pulse quickened, but instead of fear, determination surged through him. He stood tall and addressed the crowd. "We're not alone in this, but together, we're stronger." He urged the neighbors to unite, to reclaim their community from shadows. Over the next days, whispers of Calvin's revelations spread like wildfire. The HOA's grip weakened. As more residents found courage to speak out, Lorraine and her secretive allies vanished. Whether forced out or fleeing, no one knew, and Calvin, he became the unlikely hero of Whispering Pines. But just as peace seemed within reach, Calvin received one last message. Encrypted and chilling. "You've won the battle, but the war has only begun." He smiled quietly, fingers hovering over his keyboard. Let them come. He was ready.